Section 5 of Dad's Trip to Brisbane. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Son of the Exiles. Dad's Trip to Brisbane by Steele Rudd. Section 5. The Return Home. Dad and Mother tramped about Brisbane for 3 weeks, and but for meeting old Delaney, dodging through the crowd one evening, they might have been strolling about there yet. Dad and old Delaney were enemies at home, but when they met in Queen Street, they gripped hands and rejoiced as though they were never to part any more. Dad laughed and said he didn't know Delaney was down, and inquired where he was staying.
"And how are them boys of mine doing?"
he asked.
"Doing splendid,"
Delaney said. Dad was pleased.
"They gave great races in your paddock a week come Wednesday."
Dad stared and struggled for breath.
"And they're to give a ball tomorrow." "What?"
Dad shouted, opening wide his mouth and attracting much notice.
"What?"
Next minute Dad was stumping up Edward Street in advance of Mother, who was compelled to trot to keep in sight. The great metropolis had no more charms for Dad. At 9 o'clock the following night, Dad and Mother arrived at Saddletop. Gray's cart happened to be at the station, and they were given a lift to the gate. Mother thanked the man and gave him a banana, but Dad was thinking heavily. Sounds of music floated on the peaceful air and provoked Dad to profanity. He threw wide the big white gate, leaving Mother to close it. Dogs barked and bounded down the track, at first threatening to eat Dad, but then, recognising him, jumped for joy and climbed and clawed all over him, heedless of kicks and curses. Dad expressed no pleasure at seeing the house again. You would never think he'd been away at all. A large area of newly ploughed land discernible in the moonlight, and a number of fresh lucerne stacks that changed the whole aspect of Ruddville, failed to attract his eye. He noticed nothing till he came to a long line of saddle horses fastened to the fence. One had its nose in a bit of hay. Dad spotted that horse and, like a plain turkey taking wing, threw out his arms and rushed onto the verandah. Inside, the Prince of Wales schottische had just ended, and the perspiring party stood round the ballroom, ablaze with candles, listening attentively to the voices of Miss Todd and the schoolmaster's wife blending pathetically in song together. "After the ball is over," they were screeching, just when Dad burst into the room.
"What the devil's this?" he
bellowed. They stopped like a clock.
"Who brought all of you into my house?"
Consternation.
"Out of here! Out of this! The whole damn lot of you!"
"Dad!" Sarah gasped, her voice scarcely audible. Dad's enraged eye rested on the trembling form of Billy Berrup by his side. Such a howl! A brown paper parcel he held in his hand, containing a pair of heavy boots, flew at Berrup's head and struck big Mrs. McManus on the chest. Commotion, screams, and a wild rush to escape. In the stampede, Berrup was left behind, and while the little fellow frantically fought and sparred for an opening, Dad kicked at him as if he were a wallaby fast in a fence.
"Stop it!"
Dave cried angrily.
"Don't make a fool of—"
But Dad silenced Dave.
"Clear out!" he
roared.
"Leave my house!"
Dave was inclined to resist.
"Leave the place or I'll send for the police!"
Dad yelled in a wild, broken voice. "Pshaw!" Dave hissed and walked out. The ejected guests secured their horses in haste and left in disorder. Sarah and Dave and Joe, bareheaded, stood in the yard and silently stared after them. The last one passed out and the gate closed. Voices and hoofbeats died away. The neighs of a horse and the hoop-hoop of a night bird came from the ironbark ridge.
"Robbed! Ruined!"
from the house. The clock struck 2.
"Ruining me! Ruining me!"
from the house again. Mopoke, mopoke, from out the gully on the reserve. The clock struck 3. The moon ceased to shine and Dad to shout. Sarah dried her eyes and stole quietly to her room.
"Oh, well," Dave said, "let it rip."
And he and Joe turned to the barn and camped with the men. End of Dad's Trip to Brisbane by Steele Rudd. Recording by Son of the Exiles.